Hey everyone. So today you aren't going to be able to see my face because I'm sick. I'm on the mend. Don't worry. It's not COVID. I had a test. It came back negative. But I'm not pretty, or I should say I don't feel pretty. So I'm just going to give you my voice and put pictures over it. I've done videos like this before when there were technological issues. So I apologize. You'll probably see my face next time I make a video. Today we're going to talk about the history and the characteristics of Uralic languages. So the Uralic language family includes these languages that you see on the screen. Hungarian, Finnish, Estonian are the big three. And then there's a bunch of little languages around Russia and Scandinavia. And what I find most interesting about this language family is that we can tell that they're all related, but we can't really tell how they relate, and their history is pretty fuzzy. Let me explain. So for one, the geographical origin of these languages is disputed. Most sources argue that it's from Siberia, the time scale being anywhere between 7,000 to 2,000 years BC. It's also agreed that in the early Iron Age, about 500 BC, Uralic peoples started moving into the Baltic region. So Finland, Estonia, and Sami are languages that are around the Baltic Sea, and they're Uralic. But anything beyond that is pretty heavily disputed. They can't even build a family tree for these languages. For the last century, about a dozen or so proposals have been made for what this family tree could look like and how the different languages can relate. And branches have been merged, they've been split. There's been scholars that have said that all of the proposed branches can exist. There have been scholars that have said none of the proposed branches can exist. It's a nightmare. Here's a chart of the last, from Wikipedia, of the biggest proposals through the last 100 years. Like, that's just too much. Look at that. All those X's and checks. That's just hideous. So that leads us to this question, how do we know they're related? So if we can't even agree who's related to who, how do we know that they're related to each other? And surprisingly, it's pretty blatant that they're related. For one, they all have extensive case systems. These case systems go on the ends of adjectives and nouns, and they let you know what role that noun is playing in the sentence. Another thing that they all have in common is that they're agglutinative, very agglutinative. You'll end up with, you can make entire sentences out of single words in Hungarian. And there have been, funny posts on social media that I've seen about this exact thing. Big telltale marker, they have no grammatical gender. We've talked about that before on the channel, that language families will or will not have grammatical gender. This is one of them that doesn't. Most Uralic languages, notably not Hungarian, use negative verbs. So what that means is pretty easy to explain in English because we do it. So we have words like don't and doesn't. We say like, I don't know. So we're using a verb to express that we are not doing another verb. So other languages don't do that. Other languages use adjectives. They would say something like, I never know, if that makes sense. They all have a lot of vowels, and a lot of these Uralic languages play with vowel length, and it gets pretty intense. Listening to Uralic languages, it's really easy to see that they sound so funky. That's been one of the biggest things that's been written about them from Indo-European language speakers, that you just listen to them and you're like, what are you even saying? And it's my favorite. There's also a mandatory list of about 200 cognates that almost all Uralic languages are going to have. So that's what you would expect. If you have a language family, you'll have, basic nouns basic verbs, numbers, colors, those sorts of things, they're going to be similar between languages that are from the same language. There is a Proto-Uralic that has been created. I don't think it's as robust as the Proto-Indo-European, but it's there, and that's a pretty good indicator. If you can create that, that you have a language family. So, as I examine smaller and smaller languages and language families, I'm noticing that I'm reaching a lot of the same problems. Um, and I'm obviously going to keep making videos on this channel about language families. I think that that's a very interesting direction to go, is talking about kind of this historical linguistic, um, taking a historical linguistic angle. But being as this is one of the smaller entries in this list of historical linguistic videos, I'm going to take a time to mention that language is a hard thing to study, right? Like, it's always evolving. That makes it hard to like dig into from the get-go. And beyond that, it's hard to not be biased about your own language. So you reach this weird dichotomy where the people who best understand a language are the people who speak it. But the people who speak it are most likely to be more biased that their language is better than every other language. And that's a problem sometimes. Another problem you can run into trying to understand the history of a language is not very many languages have existing, or I guess I should use the word extant, documents, examples of their language in writing from history. We're going to talk about that next week when I talk about Hungarian. That, we talk about all these, languages like Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit so much because they were writing down a lot of documents, a lot of things, poetry and laws and religious texts that we can dig through, and we can learn about how their grammar works and how it's developed over time. And there's even like situations where people are writing about how things are pronounced in their language, and that's just a gold mine. You can create a spoken dead language. Look at Latin. We have, entire YouTube channel. This guy's really cool. I like him a lot. Where he just talks about how well is this Latin spoken, and can these people understand how Latin was spoken. And the only reason that he can know how Latin was spoken is because so many people wrote in Latin for hundreds of years. When you reach these smaller languages in Asia, Africa, the Americas, forget it, there's no written language until they're exposed to it, until someone brings it to them. And I'm not saying that that's universal, but it makes it harder to study these smaller languages. There's also the problem of how can you discern what's a language family and what is two languages that have things in common but not necessarily come from the same place. I'm gonna touch on this a little bit in the Hungarian video next week again, but there's only so many sounds that the human mouth can make. There's only so many words that are necessary for a language to have. There's only so many ways to package information. So trying out to find out like who's related to who and who's not related to who is not an easy thing to do, and it leads to problems. So all of this, all the things I just rambled about for a little too long, tends to lead to smaller languages and smaller language families being harder to classify and analyze, and it leaves a lot up into interpretation, and it leads to videos like this where I just kind of sit and shrug my shoulders for 5 minutes and say the few things that everybody can agree on. But hey, sometimes that's the best we can do, and sometimes that's the fun of it, is wondering and solving the human puzzle one piece at a time. Thank you very much for watching Ling King. I hope you guys get to see my face next time in the Hungarian video that I'm very excited for. And coming up soon is the Estonian video from Che. So I'm making this Uralic video, and then I'm going to make the Hungarian, and Che is going to make an Estonian because he loves the Estonian language. I'm making the Hungarian video just because I thought that I knew about the origins of the Hungarian peoples and their language, and then I dug into it, and I was 100% wrong. So I'm excited to tell you guys about that. And yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I guess listening more than anything. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and have a great day. Bye-bye.